Welcome to Catholic Shrine Basilica YouTube channel.
Saint Basil's Cathedral, Pokrovsky Cathedral, Moscow, Russia. Introduction. Saint Basil's Cathedral is Moscow's most famous artistic work of architecture. Also called Pokrovsky Cathedral, or the Cathedral of Intercession of the Virgin by the Moat, it is the most recognizable Russian building. This cathedral means to Russians the same as the Eiffel Tower to the French, being an honorable symbol of their past, present, and future. The Cathedral of Vasily the Blessed, Russian Собор Василия Блаженного, Romanized, Собор Василия Блаженного, known in English as Saint Basil's Cathedral, is an Orthodox church in Red Square of Moscow, and is one of the most popular cultural symbols of Russia. The building, now a museum, is officially known as the Cathedral of the Intercession of the Most Holy Theotokos on the Moat, or Pokrovsky Cathedral. It was built from 1555 to 1561 on orders from Ivan the Terrible and commemorates the capture of Kazan and Astrakhan. Its completion with its colors was made in 1683. It was the city's tallest building until the completion of the Ivan the Great Bell Tower in 1600. The original building, known as Trinity Church and later Trinity Cathedral, contained 8 chapels arranged around a 9th, central chapel dedicated to the Intercession. A 10th chapel was erected in 1588 over the grave of the venerated local Saint Basil. In the 16th and 17th centuries, because it was perceived as the earthly symbol of the heavenly city. Like all churches in Byzantine Christianity, the church was popularly known as the Jerusalem, and served as an allegory of the Jerusalem Temple in the annual Palm Sunday parade attended by the Patriarch of Moscow and the Tsar. The cathedral has 9 domes, each one corresponding to a different church, and is shaped like the flame of a bonfire rising into the sky. Dmitry Shvidkovsky, in his book Russian Architecture in the West, states that it is like no other Russian building. Nothing similar can be found in the entire millennium of Byzantine tradition from the 5th to the 15th century, a strangeness that astonishes by its unexpectedness, complexity, and dazzling interleaving of the manifold details of its design. The cathedral foreshadowed the climax of Russian national architecture in the 17th century. As part of the program of state atheism, the church was confiscated from the Russian Orthodox community as part of the Soviet Union's anti-religious campaigns and has operated as a division of the State Historical Museum since 1928. It was completely secularized in 1929 and remains a federal property of the Russian Federation. The church has been part of the Moscow Kremlin in Red Square UNESCO World Heritage Site since 1990. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, weekly Orthodox Christian services with prayer to Saint Basil have been restored since 1997. History of Saint Basil's Cathedral, Moscow, Russia. The Cathedral of the Intercession of the Virgin on the Moat is better known as the Cathedral of Saint Basil the Blessed. Saint Basil's Cathedral. It is the most recognizable church in Russia. Saint Basil's Cathedral was built in the 16th century by the order of Ivan the Terrible. Since then it has fascinated travelers coming to Moscow. Some found it bizarre, its unusual beauty entranced others. The church is shrouded in legends and myths. People say that the cruel Russian Tsar had the architect blinded to prevent him from building a more magnificent building for anyone else. Legend has it that Napoleon wanted to destroy the cathedral when he realized he couldn't relocate it to Paris. The cathedral was commissioned by Ivan the Terrible to commemorate the capture of the Khanate of Kazan. It was constructed from 1555 to 1561. St. Basil's is a cluster of buildings, a central church surrounded by 9 auxiliary churches, 8 dedicated to Ivan's 8 victories over the Tatars, and a smaller one consecrated to Saint Basil. This famous Moscow saint was buried in the grounds, and his name later became the name of the cathedral. According to chronicles from the time, Saint Basil's Cathedral was designed by 2 Russian architects, Barma and Postnik. Another theory suggests that Yakovlev and Barma were one person. Many serious Russian historians believe that architects were not blinded, and went to construct more churches in Russia. The third version says that the temple was erected under the guidance of an architect from Western Europe. The unusual composition of Saint Basil's Cathedral and a blend of Russian and Western European elements of decoration prove that there was a distinctive influence from abroad. The last version, however, has no proof in chronicles. Saint Basil's Cathedral on Red Square remains the most unusual church in Russia and has become an enigmatic symbol of Moscow itself, surviving the revolution and Soviet times. Saint Basil's Cathedral in Moscow is a proud survivor of the city's tumultuous history. Rising majestically from Red Square, it provides a striking contrast to the monochrome buildings characteristic of the Soviet era that fill much of the city. It has remained standing despite several fires, Napoleon's invasion, and the demolition of churches like the Cathedral of Christ the Savior under Stalin. At the southern end of Red Square stands the icon of Russia, Saint Basil's Cathedral. This crazy confusion of colors, patterns, and shapes is the culmination of a style that is unique to Russian architecture. In 1552, Ivan the Terrible captured the Tatar stronghold of Kazan on the Feast of Intercession. He commissioned this landmark church, officially the Intercession Cathedral, to commemorate the victory. Created from 1555 to 1561, this masterpiece would become the ultimate symbol of Russia. The cathedral's apparent anarchy of shapes hides a comprehensible plan of 9 main chapels. The tall tent-roof tower in the center houses the namesake Church of the Intercession of the Mother of God. The 4 biggest domes top 4 octagonal towered chapels: the Church of Sts Cyprian and Justina, Church of the Holy Trinity, Church of the Icon of St. Nicholas the Miracle Worker, and the Church of the Entry of the Lord into Jerusalem. Finally, there are 4 smaller chapels in between. Each chapel was consecrated in honor of an event or battle in the struggle against Kazan. Legend has it that Ivan had the architects blinded so that they could never build anything comparable. This is a myth, however, as records show that they were employed a quarter of a century later, and 4 years after Ivan's death, to add an additional chapel to the structure. The Church of Saint Vasily the Blessed, the northeastern chapel on the first floor, contains the canopy-covered crypt of its namesake saint, one of the most revered in Moscow. Vasily Basil, the Blessed, was known as a holy fool, sometimes going naked and purposefully humiliating himself for the greater glory of God. He was believed to be a seer and miracle maker, and even Ivan the Terrible revered and feared him. This 10th chapel, the only one at ground level, was added in 1588, after the saint's death. Look for the icon depicting Saint Vasily himself, with Red Square and the Kremlin in the background. History of St. Basil's Cathedral, Moscow. The site of the church had been, historically, a busy marketplace between the St. Frols, later saviors, gate of the Moscow Kremlin, and the outlying Posad. The center of the marketplace was marked by the Trinity Church, built of the same white stone as the Kremlin of Dmitry Donskoy, 1366–68, and its cathedrals. Tsar Ivan IV marked every victory of the Russo-Kazan War by erecting a wooden memorial church next to the walls of Trinity Church. By the end of his Astrakhan campaign, it was shrouded within a cluster of 7 wooden churches. According to the sketchy report in Nikon's Chronicle, in the autumn of 1554, Ivan ordered construction of the wooden Church of Intercession on the same site, on the Moat. 1 year later, Ivan ordered construction of a new stone cathedral on the site of Trinity Church that would commemorate his campaigns. Dedication of a church to a military victory was a major innovation for Muscovy. The placement of the church outside of the Kremlin walls was a political statement in favor of Posad commoners and against hereditary boyars. Chronists clearly identified the new building as Trinity Church after its easternmost sanctuary. The status of Sobor, large assembly church, has not been bestowed on it yet. In the same year, through the will of Tsar and Lord and Grand Prince Ivan began making the pledged church, as he promised for the capture of Kazan, Trinity and Intercession and 7 sanctuaries, also called on the Moat. And the builder was Barmo with Company. The identity of the architect is unknown. Tradition held that the church was built by two architects, Barma and Postnik. The official Russian Cultural Heritage Register lists Barma and Postnik Yakovlev. Researchers propose that both names refer to the same person, Postnik Yakovlev, or, alternatively, Ivan Yakovlevich Barma, Varfolomy. Legend held that Ivan blinded the architect so that he could not recreate the masterpiece elsewhere, although the real Postnik Yakovlev remained active at least throughout the 1560s. There is evidence that construction involved stonemasons from Pskov and German lands. Architecture of Saint Basil's Cathedral. Architectural style. Tinted roof church. Architects. Postnik Yakovlev, Ivan Barma. Saint Basil's was built from 1555 to 1561. Architectural historians often credit Ivan Barma and Postnik Yakovlev as the architects and builders of this famed church. However, one legend stipulates that Italian architects designed the cathedral, and the Rathfuls or Ivan IV blinded them so that they could not replicate the design. Saint Basil's Cathedral is one of the most unusual Russian churches. A visiting 19th-century French aristocrat, the Marquis de Custine, compared the cathedral to the scales of a golden fish, the enameled skin of a serpent, the changeful hues of the lizard, the glossy rose and azure of the pigeon's neck. He wondered whether the men who go to worship God in this box of confectionery work could be a Christian. The height of St. Basil's Cathedral is 65 meters. For a long time until the end of the 16th century, it was the tallest building in Moscow. 9 independent temples are built on a single foundation and are interconnected by internal vaulted passages decorated with ornaments in the form of herbs and flowers. The building is devoid of a clearly expressed facade. Whichever side you approach the cathedral, it seems that it is the main one. The cathedral is built of bricks. In the 16th century, this material was relatively new. Before, churches' traditional materials was limestone. No matter how complex the structure of the temple may seem, it is very logical. The center of the composition is the main tent-roof church of the Intercession, around which there are 8 other pillar-like dome churches. In plan, the cathedral forms an 8-pointed star. The 8-pointed star in Christian symbolism carries a deep meaning. It symbolizes the entire Christian church, which is a guiding star in a person's life to heavenly Jerusalem. Exterior. St. Basil's Cathedral boasts a design unparalleled anywhere else in Russia, indicating the brilliant talent of its creators who dared to break the traditional canons of religious architecture. Its 9 towers are crowned with candy-colored onion domes exuding festivity and cheerfulness. Each tower is embellished with layers of cornices, kokoshniks, and windows. Floral motifs snake up the porches, stairs, and galleries, and geometric tiles and patterns punctuate the brickwork. Originally, St. Basil's Cathedral was not the riot of color that we see today, but had an austere red and white facade. In the 17th and 18th centuries, successive emperors and empresses significantly modified the cathedral's appearance. Brick porches and galleries were added, multicolored paintwork and tiles brightened the facade, and the ornamental domes attained their vibrant colors and design. Interior. St. Basil's is uniquely fascinating for the variety of architectural and artistic styles present in its interior. The wonders to be discovered inside the cathedral include oil paintings, frescoes, portraits, and landscape painting. Iconostases comprising over 400 masterpieces of Moscow and Novgorod iconography from the 16th to 19th centuries, and valuable exhibits belonging to the church and imperial family. The cathedral's chapels are connected via a labyrinth of vaulted internal passages and galleries, which are adorned from floor to ceiling with colorful geometric designs and natural motifs. Architecture style of St. Basil's Cathedral. Because the church has no analog in the preceding, contemporary, or later architecture of Muscovy and Byzantine cultural tradition in general, the sources that inspired Barma and Postnik are disputed. Eugene Violet Leduc rejected European roots for the cathedral, opining that its corbel arches were Byzantine and ultimately Asian. A modern Asian hypothesis considers the cathedral a recreation of Kolsarev Mosque, which was destroyed by Russian troops after the siege of Kazan. 19th-century Russian writers, starting with Ivan Zabalin, emphasized the influence of the vernacular wooden churches of the Russian north. Their motifs made their ways into masonry, particularly the votive churches that did not need to house substantial congregations. David Watkin also wrote of a blend of Russian and Byzantine roots, calling the cathedral the climax of Russian vernacular wooden architecture. The church combines the staggered layered design of the earliest, 1505 to 1508, part of the Ivan the Great bell tower, the central tent of the Church of Ascension in Kolomenskoye 1530s, and the cylindric shape of the Church of Beheading of John the Baptist in Dyakovo, 1547, but the origin of these unique buildings is equally debated. The church in Kolomenskoye, according to Sergei Podyapolsky, was built by Italian Petrarch Mali, although mainstream history has not yet accepted his opinion. Andrei Batalov revised the year of completion of Dyakovo Church from 1547 to the 1560s, 70s, and noted that Trinity Church could have had no tangible predecessors at all. Dmitry Shvitkovsky suggested that the improbable shapes of the Intercession Church in the Church of Ascension in Kolomenskoye manifested an emerging national renaissance, blending earlier Muscovite elements with the influence of Italian Renaissance. A large group of Italian architects and craftsmen continuously worked in Moscow in 1474 to 1539, as well as Greek refugees who arrived in the city after the fall of Constantinople. These two groups, according to Shvitkovsky, helped Moscow rulers in forging the doctrine of Third Rome, which in turn promoted assimilation of contemporary Greek and Italian culture. Shvitkovsky noted the resemblance of the cathedral's floor plan to Italian concepts by Antonio da San Gallo the Younger and Donato Bramante, but most likely Filarich's Trattato di Architettura. Other Russian researchers noted a resemblance to sketches by Leonardo da Vinci, although he could not have been known in Ivan's Moscow. Nikolai Brunov recognized the influence of these prototypes but not their significance. He suggested that mid-16th century Moscow already had local architects trained in Italian tradition, architectural drawing, and perspective, and that this culture was lost during the time of troubles. Andrei Batalov wrote that judging by the number of novel elements introduced with Trinity Church, it was most likely built by German craftsmen. Batalov and Shvitkovsky noted that during Ivan's reign, Germans and Englishmen replaced Italians, although German influence peaked later during the reign of Mikhail Romanov. German influence is indirectly supported by the rusticated pilasters of the central church, a feature more common in contemporary Northern Europe than in Italy. The 1983 academic edition of Monuments of Architecture in Moscow takes the middle ground. The church is, most likely, a product of the complex interaction of distinct Russian traditions of wooden and stone architecture, with some elements borrowed from the works of Italians in Moscow. Specifically, the style of brickwork in the vaults is Italian layout. Instead of following the original ad hoc layout, 7 churches around the central core, Ivan's architects opted for a more symmetrical floor plan with 8 side churches around the core, producing a thoroughly coherent, logical plan. Despite the erroneous latter notion of a structure devoid of restraint or reason, influenced by the memory of Ivan's irrational atrocities, the central core and the 4 larger churches placed on the 4 major compass points are octagonal. The 4 diagonally placed smaller churches are cuboid, although their shape is hardly visible through later additions. The larger churches stand on massive foundations, while the smaller ones were each placed on a raised platform as if hovering above ground. Although the side churches are arranged in perfect symmetry, the cathedral as a whole is not. The larger central church was deliberately offset to the west from the geometric center of the side churches, to accommodate its larger apse on the eastern side. As a result of this subtle calculated asymmetry, viewing from the north and the south presents a complex multi-axial shape, while the western facade, facing the Kremlin, appears properly symmetrical and monolithic. The latter perception is reinforced by the fortress-style machicolation and corbelled cornice of the western church of entry into Jerusalem, mirroring the real fortifications of the Kremlin. Inside the composite church is a labyrinth of narrow vaulted corridors and vertical cylinders of the churches. Today the cathedral consists of 9 individual chapels. The largest, central one, the Church of the Intercession, is 46 meters, 151 feet, tall internally but has a floor area of only 64 square meters, 690 square feet. Nevertheless, it is wider and airier than the church in Kolomenskoye with its exceptionally thick walls. The corridors functioned as internal parvises. The western corridor, adorned with a unique flat caisson ceiling, doubled as the narthex. The detached belfry of the original Trinity Church stood southwest or south of the main structure. Late 16th and early 17th century plans depict a simple structure with 3 roof tents, most likely covered with sheet metal. No buildings of this type survive to date, although it was then common and used in all of the pass-through towers of Scoredom. August von Meyenberg's Panorama, 1661, presents a different building with a cluster of small onion domes. Structure. The foundations, as was traditional in medieval Moscow, were built of white stone, while the churches themselves were built of red brick, 28 by 14 by 8 centimeters, 11.0 by 5.5 by 3.1 inch. Then a relatively new material, the first attested brick building in Moscow, the New Kremlin Wall, was started in 1485. Surveys of the structure show that the basement level is perfectly aligned, indicating use of professional drawing and measurement, but each subsequent level becomes less and less regular. Restorers who replaced parts of the brickwork in 1954 to 1955 discovered that the massive brick walls conceal an internal wooden frame running the entire height of the church. This frame, made of elaborately tied thin studs, was erected as a life-size spatial model of the future cathedral and was then gradually enclosed in solid masonry. The builders, fascinated by the flexibility of the new technology, used red bricks as a decorative medium both inside and out, leaving as much brickwork open as possible. When location required the use of stone walls, it was decorated with a brickwork pattern painted over stucco. A major novelty introduced by the church was the use of strictly architectural means of exterior decoration. Sculpture and sacred symbols employed by earlier Russian architecture are completely missing. Floral ornaments are a later addition. Instead, the church boasts a diversity of 3-dimensional architectural elements executed in brick. The mystery of colors. The church in the 16th century looked different from today. The vivid multicolored pattern on its domes appeared only in the 17th, early 18th century. Original cathedral was painted mostly red and white. Numerous art historians believe that the Cathedral of Saint Basil, the Blessed, was built as a visual representation of the heavenly Jerusalem. It was meant to symbolize both a town and heaven in the middle of Moscow. How to depict the heavenly city? Does it need to resemble Jerusalem? Should it look like the Kremlin? The epochs changed, along with them, the people's idea of how paradise should look. The church acquired its vivid present-day colors more than 100 years after its construction. The bright pattern of the church domes makes it look like a blossoming garden of heaven. Colors. The church acquired its present-day vivid colors in several stages from the 1680s to 1848. Russian attitude towards color in the 17th century changed in favor of bright colors. Iconographic and mural art experienced an explosive growth in the number of available paints, dyes, and their combinations. The original color scheme, missing these innovations, was far less challenging. It followed the depiction of the heavenly city in the Book of Revelation. And he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. And there was a rainbow round about the throne, in sight like unto an emerald. And round about the throne were 24 seats. And upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment. And they had on their heads crowns of gold. The 25 seats from the biblical reference are alluded to in the building structure, with the addition of 8 small onion domes around the central tent, 4 around the western side church and 4 elsewhere. This arrangement survived through most of the 17th century. The walls of the church mixed bare red brickwork or painted imitation of bricks with white ornaments, in roughly equal proportion. The domes, covered with tin, were uniformly gilded, creating an overall bright but fairly traditional combination of white, red and golden colors. Moderate use of green and blue ceramic inserts provided a touch of rainbow as prescribed by the Bible. While historians agree on the color of the 16th century domes, their shape is disputed. Boris Eating wrote that they most likely were of the same onion shape as the present-day domes. However, both Kolomenskoye and Dyakovo churches have flattened hemispherical domes, and the same type could have been used by Barma and Postnik. Saint Basil's Cathedral inside. The cathedral is not very spacious but intimate and atmospheric inside. You can follow a maze of darkened galleries from one chapel to the next, experiencing the building's medieval past. These days the church is a museum. What are the top reasons to go inside? Find the shrine of Saint Basil and learn the story of the Russian holy fools. Take photos of the church interior. In most Russian churches, photography is not allowed. Discover the hiding places in the walls where treasures were kept in the past. Learn the secrets of the Russian church acoustics. A true gem of your visit will be the church male choir singing in one of the chapels. Allegory of Jerusalem. Construction of wraparound ground floor arcades in the 1680s visually united the 9 churches of the original cathedral into a single building. Earlier, the clergy and the public perceived it as 9 distinct churches on a common base. A generalized allegory of the Orthodox heavenly city similar to fantastic cities of medieval miniatures. At a distance, separate churches towering over their base resembled the towers and churches of a distant citadel, rising above the defensive wall. The abstract allegory was reinforced by real-life religious rituals where the church played the role of the biblical temple in Jerusalem. The capital city, Moscow, is split into 3 parts. The first of them, called Kitay-Gorod, is encircled with a solid thick wall. It contains an extraordinary beautiful church, all clad in shiny bright gems, called Jerusalem. It is the destination of an annual Palm Sunday walk, when the Grand Prince must lead a donkey carrying the Patriarch, from the Church of Virgin Mary to the Church of Jerusalem which stands next to the citadel walls. Here is where the most illustrious princely, noble and merchant families live. Here is also the main Muscovite marketplace. The trading square is built as a brick rectangle, with 20 lanes on each side where the merchants have their shops and cellars. Templum S. Trinitatis Etiam Hierusalem Dicitor. Ad quo Palmerum Fest Patriarcha Asino Incidens a Caesar Introducitor. Temple of Holy Trinity, also called Jerusalem, to where the Tsar leads the Patriarch sitting on a donkey on the Palm holiday. The last donkey walk, Hujjania na Slatse, took place in 1693. Mikhail Petrovich Kudryavtsev noted that all cross processions of the period began, as described by Petrus, from the Dormition Church, passed through St. Frol's Saviour's Gate and ended at Trinity Cathedral. For these processions the Kremlin itself became an open-air temple, properly oriented from its narthex, Cathedral Square, in the west through the royal doors, Saviour's Gate, to the sanctuary, Trinity Cathedral, in the east. Bell Tower, added to the cathedral's ensemble in the late 1600s, and slightly detached from the main structure. It is topped with a steep octagonal tent lined with small windows and multicolored tiles. On the southern wall of the bell tower is an enormous and famous icon, the veil with Basil and John the Blessed. There are several themed and general excursions available to book at Saint Basil's Cathedral, but for an enjoyable and informative day out, why not take express to Russia's private Moscow tour, which includes a visit to this magnificent monument. Renovations and changes to Saint Basil's Cathedral. In the late 1600s, Saint Basil's Cathedral underwent a renovation and expansion project. From 1680 to 1683, a new two-story brick annex was added to the cathedral's eastern side, creating additional space for the priests and the congregation. The annex features an ornate exterior with decorative arches and highly intricate carvings. Saint Basil's Cathedral today. Saint Basil's Cathedral was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1990. Church services resumed in 1991 and work began to finally bring the cathedral's bells back to life. Today, the bell tower is home to 19 bells ranging from 25 to nearly 500 years old. In 2007, the Saint Basil's was declared to be one of the 7 wonders of Russia. Today, Saint Basil's Cathedral bustles with spiritual and secular activity. Aside from its chapels and church services, the cathedral is also home to festivals, exhibitions, artistic events, concerts, and so much more. Exterior. Saint Basil's architecture is unique throughout the whole of Russia. Its 9 church towers are crowned with candy-colored onion domes and embellished with layers of cornices, kokoshniks, windows, colorful tiles, and patterns. Interior. Saint Basil's ensemble comprises 11 churches, each with unique architecture and artistic decoration, and consecrated in honor of significant events in Russia's political and spiritual history. Visitors can discover marvelous artwork, magnificent iconostases housing hundreds of masterful icons, and valuable exhibits belonging to the church and imperial family. Annual Feast Day. Feast Day, August 2nd. The annual feast day of the Church of St. Basil's Cathedral, Moscow, Russia is celebrated on August 2nd each year. Mass timing. Monday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. June-August, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. September, October, May 11 a.m. to 6 p.m. November-April, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Closed on the first Wednesday of each month. Contact info. Saint Basil's Cathedral, Red Square, 7 Moscow, Russia, 109,012. Connectivities. Airway. St. Basil's Cathedral, Pokrovsky Cathedral, Moscow, Russia to Bolshaya Sukharevskaya Plashchad. Distance 14 minutes, 8.6 kilometers, via Garden Ring. Railway. Street Basil's Cathedral, Pokrovsky Cathedral, Moscow, Russia to Leningradsky Railway Station. Distance between 24 minutes, 10.6 kilometers, via Garden Ring.
If you wish to know more about Catholic shrine basilicas, Marian shrines and Marian apparitions, subscribe to our Catholic Shrine Basilica YouTube channel. Like and share with your loved ones. For more churches website www.catholicshrinebasilica.com.